Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's lovely to see you all at the synagogue, and also everyone who is watching us online. Many greetings. As it is written on the screen, it's Shabbat Tavo. If you feel a little bit confused with our Torah readings, it's because we got a little bit ahead of ourselves. So next week, when Boaz is reading the words again, you will feel a sense of deja vu. It's just be blessed with the portion twice. The Torah reading for this Shabbat Tavo was from the book of Devarim, chapter 26, verses 16 and 19. The whole parasha is chapter 26 to 29:8. Like you, that I have printed out a little bit to go through at the beginning of our drash, so you're not going to miss anything. Don't worry. We got the Haftarah correct. Again, sorry for those who had to jump in and change the reading. It was actually Isaiah 60. It's the whole chapter, verse 1 to 22. You will hear chapter 61 next Shabbat. Messianic writings was from Yochanan 14, verses 1 to 21. As I said, it's Shabbat Tavo, which means when you enter. And so we are getting really, really close to the end of this Torah reading cycle and to the new cycle. Just out of interest, after this parasha, there are only 6 chapters left in the scroll to read through. So we are that close. And Shabbat Tavo, the readings for this parasha is an interesting one because it has an odd mixture of commandments. When we start with the parasha, there's a commandment to bring first fruits, offerings, tithes of the land. And of course, we have that passage which we should have read today, and so I'll read it to you, only in English, from verse 16. This day the Lord your God commands you to observe these statutes and judgments. Therefore you shall be careful to observe them with all your heart and with all your soul. Today you have proclaimed the Lord to be your God, and that you will walk in his ways, and keep his statutes, his commandments, and his judgments, and that you will obey his voice. Also today the Lord has proclaimed you to be his special people, just as he promised you, that you should keep all his commandments, and that he will set you high above all nations which he has made in praise, in name, and in honor, and that you may be a holy people to the Lord your God, just as he has spoken. It's a beautiful passage. There is a lot in that passage, as we will hear, but this is not everything which is in the Torah reading for us. There are also the continuing chapters, and if you read your parasha for this week, you would know that it's all about the blessings and the curses. You know, the 6 tribes on Mount Ebal reciting the curses, and 6 tribes on the Mount Gerizim reciting the blessings. This is the commandment which is given for the tribes to fulfill when they enter the land. So it says, this is what you will do. 6 will go that way, 6 that way, and you will say these words as you are on those mountains. An interesting one, because I always had in my head this image of the 6 tribes saying the blessings and the curses, and it kind of spreading over the valleys. And actually, I think in reality we can say that they wouldn't hear each other. That's not how it worked. But as we are here at this point, all 12 tribes heard what was to be said. They can't claim that only know half of the story. It's an interesting parasha because when you read it, it's actually a parasha about personal choices that we make in our lives. And despite the fact that we have these 6 tribes saying those words, actually what is the core message of this parasha is how we walk with God, and that walking with God is truly our choice. It starts right in the beginning of the parasha, even when we talk, where's the command to bring the tithes and the offerings, the bikurim. And when I read it, it really struck me. When it starts in verse 13, it says, I have rid my house of the things set aside for God and given them to the Levi, the foreigner, orphan, and the widow, in keeping with every one of the mitzvot you gave me. I haven't disobeyed any of your mitzvot or forgotten them. I haven't eaten any of this food, which was set apart, when mourning. I haven't put any of it aside when unclean. And this passage continues. It goes to verse 15. It also says, I have listened to what Adonai my God has said, and I have done everything you ordered me to do. And it's a really curious little event that the people were commanded when they went into the land, and then when they harvested the first fruits and brought them this little declaration. We're commanded to go and declare with our mouths, this is what we've done. It's not just a ritual, because God knows if we have done what we declared or not. And truly, no one should come before the Lord and makes false declarations. Well, it's just not going to work, is it? That in itself is breaking of the commandments not to make false declarations. And it's a curious thing because we are commanded to say, this is what we've done. We've done all those things which you commanded us. We obeyed what you said. It's about us confirming the behavior which we have exhibited. And in a similar way, as we continue reading through the parasha, we realize that this is the key message of what is written, the curses and the blessings, as I will refer to them. And so let's have a look a little bit how and what the Torah is telling us. Now the curses are split into 2 sections. They're actually more on kind of what we say the curses section than the blessings. And the first section has 12 declarations of a behavior which is unacceptable among the people of God. It's creating an idol, perverting the justice which is due to the weak and vulnerable, treating parents with contempt, taking bribes to commit murder, and so on and so on. There is a list of them, 12. You can go and read them. It is quite curious mixture because it looks at various behavior which is exhibited outwardly, but also which is inwards. So you shall not hate your neighbor. And then the curses, this passage finishes with one which really is all-encompassing. It says, cursed is the one who does not confirm all the words of this law by observing them. There is an expectation that you will follow the words of the Torah as you hear it, as being repeated. And then, as we read, we switch to the blessings. And it's curious because with the blessings are actually really short. You go and have a look in chapter 28. Isn't it curious how, actually the blessings can cover everything in a few words. And it says, if you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments, which I command you today, that the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations, and all these blessings shall come upon you, overtake you. It's like overtake you, you will see them in front of you because they will be so abundant, because you obey the voice of the Lord your God. And really, here they are, the 4 declarations of the blessing. Wherever you live, be it in a city or in a country, you will be blessed with your offspring, all kinds of economic produce, be it herd, cattle, flocks, produce of the fruit trees, fields, everything you do. You will be blessed with all you need for a good life. All your enemies will be defeated in front of you, leaving you to live your life in peace. I think the events of the last 6 months, 9 months make us really appreciate what it means to live your life in peace, not threatened by a nation close or far away. The section of the blessings portray peaceful, productive life when you are able to sustain yourself, your family, with the produce of your hands. And the section of these blessings end up with the promise that Adonai will establish those faithful to him as his holy people, if you keep the commandments of God and walk in his ways. And all of this is witnessed by the people around. Because Moshe continues, as he describes the blessing, he says, all the people of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they shall be afraid of you. So, what it tells us is that walking in obedience to God is not something which is hidden, and the blessings are not hidden either. This is something which is visible to the nations around, who see that peacefulness and prosperity and blessing which is upon the people who walk with God. And then suddenly we have a switch, and going back to the curses. And this time the curses are a reversal of the blessings and more. And you can read these, I would say, grueling, terrible 52 verses, which truly summarize on what will happen to the people, the tragic consequences of walking away from God, which bring complete destruction to the lives of the people. And it's terrible when you read it, because it talks about cities under siege where there's nothing to be eaten, and what people do in those situations. And that has been historically fulfilled. It truly is a terrible passage to read and know that those consequences of disobedience, which are mentioned here, were fulfilled in the history. And so it takes us back to that point of the personal choices, and the fact that it's the personal obedience or disobedience that is truly relevant in this passage, where we have that choice put in front of us, what we do. And yes, we also talk about national obedience and disobedience. But throughout the history, we have seen that even when Israel turned away, you could say they turned away as a nation, away from God to follow idols and do their own thing, they still were people who remained faithful to God and the Torah. We can remember here the 7,000 faithful that even Prophet Elijah wasn't aware of. He didn't know. We didn't know their names. We just know from what God said that they were 7,000 faithful at that point of time who have not bound their knee to the idols. And so, yes, national obedience is important, but the national obedience only comes from a personal obedience to God. And what this passage is telling us, that it's always been a personal choice to follow God and the commandments. The verses we hear, it talks about hearing the voice of your Lord, the God, doing what is righteous and good in God's eyes, is a matter of one's personal conviction, which recognizes God's supremacy in his or her life and the willingness to live the life in the way that God has commanded. And it truly needs to lead us to a question on how is it possible to achieve this level of obedience? I mean, that you truly live a holy life, to do what is right, because we're humans. Now, the reality is that the Torah has an answer as well. It outlined a system of sacrifices, and I'm sure we will look at those soon, because we are coming to the high holidays, where the system of sacrifices would be demonstrated visibly in the temple times. And those sacrifices, among other things, were there to bring correction in the relationship between man and God that has been damaged by one's personal sin, which, as we know, is intentional disobedience to God's command. And we had that discussion yesterday about the sacrifices, and I think today we don't truly understand the importance and the impact which those sacrifices had, because we haven't seen the temple standing for the last 2,000 years, those sacrifices being enacted. But the one thing we know, that the sacrifice to bring that reconciliation with God was just part of doing the teshuvah, turning away from one's evil deeds. It had to be a change of heart that would spur you to recognize the sinful behavior and to bring that sacrifice in order to make things right with God. We don't fully get this now, again, because we have not experienced this, but sacrifices were very costly. You would bring the best of your flock, your herd, a productive animal that would otherwise generate you economic goods, meat or wool, milk, would have offspring. So bringing a sacrifice truly was something which hurt your purse. And yet, it was this sacrificial system that was essential to ensure that you were able to approach God, enjoy his favor and blessing. In Messianic Judaism, we know and understand that the Messiah was the ultimate sacrifice, bringing permanent reconciliation between man and God. And if you call upon his name and you follow him, like we read today in Yohanan 14, we would be able to do what is right and good in God's eyes. As our Messiah says, because I live, you will live. And if you love me, you keep my commandments. Those were not new commandments. They were what we have, what was given to us. And when we read the words of Yeshua, they are the ultimate interpretation of the Torah and the meaning of those commandments, which brings shalom in our lives. Today we don't fully understand the impact and importance of sacrifices, as I said, as a method of seeking reconciliation. And we know that today we cannot bring sacrifices without the existence of the temple. But what we have is a record which tells us that bringing sacrifices wasn't in any way negated or cancelled by the ultimate sacrifice of our Messiah. This week, as a community, we've been studying the book of Acts and to learn about the life of the believing community in the first century. And it's really interesting reading because it's rooted, describing the events, the history of it. We know that the people who are described in there, that there are other historic records about them. Just mentioning Gamaliel the elder, we heard about the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin. So the book of Acts is a book rooted in history. And I was really surprised to read that actually among those believers, the growth of the community in Jerusalem, as we read about it, there was a large number of priests. And if you missed that, I'm not surprised, because it's just one little hint there. It says in chapter 6, verse 7, that the word of God spread, and a number of the disciples multiplied greatly in Jerusalem, and a great many of the priests were obedient to the faith. Not just few, but great many of the priests. Large number of them, priests who were fully versed in application of the commandments in serving in the temple, the ones who knew the commandments, the Torah inside out, and had to ensure that all the rituals and all the sacrifices are brought in a correct way. And here they are, not only serving the temple, but also, as we read, there are believers in Yeshua as the Messiah. As we are approaching the high holidays shortly, and so it's appropriate for us to think about the sacrifices and atonement which is necessary for sin. We are only 2 Shabbats away from Yom Kippur. So this is truly a topic which we should be thinking about. The Torah portion is talking about the blessings and curses, and it shows us that we all have choice in which way we go. And we have responsibility for our spiritual walk with God. I think that as we consider and ponder over the need for sacrifice, for the sin sacrifice in our own lives, we also need to ask ourselves some questions. How is your relationship with God? Do you hear his voice? Do you see his power, redemption in your life? How has your life changed over the last year? Are you able to pray or converse with God and know in your heart that he hears you and he answers your prayers? He answers your questions. He gives clarity over the confusion which you may have in your life. Have you grown in your faith? Do you walk more closely with God? Do you have in your life the peace and acceptance that comes from the knowledge of your salvation? If you can't say yes to any of those questions, now is the time to contemplate. Why is it so? And look for some answers and changes in your life.